Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to wrap up my Repertoire series of talks on the best and worst recordings of all the Shostakovich symphonies with numbers 2 and 3. Now, I know in the comments one of you said, oh, please don't do 2 and 3 together. Well, you're right. They're very, very different, but I'm still doing them together. And you may notice that normally I have like a stack of recordings all ready to rock that I'm going to sort through to talk about each works. But here I do not, because it doesn't make any difference. That's the bottom line with symphonies numbers 2 and 3. And I'm going to tell you why. And I know some of you will disagree, and I know that there are some of you who like these works very much. I like them. I really do. That doesn't mean that I need to go through a stack of recordings because however specific your particular tastes may be in these particular works, for the vast majority of mankind and Shostakovich listenership, it's just not going to matter. Why is it? Okay, let's get to it. First, both symphonies were composed, they were early works, composed as sort of as experiments. They existed during a time when the goals of socialist realism and the goals of musical futurism were congruent. And that congruency lasted for about 15 minutes before the communist authorities decided to take over, artistic expression and insist that everything should be populist and easy and listenable. Shostakovich was a major futurist during this time, and he wrote these two symphonies to revolutionary texts. Both of them have choral finales, to absolutely atrocious, awful, terrible, stupid poems. And Shostakovich knew that they were awful and terrible and stupid. And Shostakovich was a dedicated communist, but he also had taste. He believed in the new regime, in replacing the czarist horror which had come before, as did many people at the time. It was an optimistic time, and they were really going to march into the future with their factories whirring and their agricultural combines, combining, and the march of the proletariat was proletarializing, and oh gosh, it was all going to be terrific. Well, we know what happened. It didn't work out that way. But these two symphonies embody that moment, possibly more than any other symphonies by major Soviet composers, or major works by major Soviet composers. There was a lot of music written at that time that was quite modern and futuristic, and actually we may talk about some of that. Mosolov, the Iron Foundry, that's one of the surviving relics of that period. So the two symphonies, numbers 2 and 3, are both single movement works. They are quite different from one another. To that extent, I am totally in sympathy with the person who said, please do them separately, because they are. They're very, very different works, but they are equally experimental and they are equally unpopular. And the bottom line, as a purely practical matter, is that the only reason you're going to get them or find them is if you're getting a cycle of the complete Shostakovich symphonies. That's the only reason people record them. No one, to my knowledge, has ever said, I think these two things are masterpieces, I want to do them separately, and it's the only Shostakovich I have any affection for, and I'm not going to touch anything else he wrote, and I'm going to exalt symphonies numbers 2 and 3. I mean, it just doesn't happen. They usually came coupled together on LPs. Nowadays, of course, you can download or stream, so they're kind of detached from maybe the original context in which they were recorded. But the bottom line is that no one has ever done them separately. I mean, I think there may have been one recording of the third or something. I don't know. But basically, all of the best cycles, all the big Shostakovich people, they only do them out of obligation to finish the bloody cycle. And some people do them with more enthusiasm, some people do them with less. What are the criteria you're going to be looking for in a performance of one of these symphonies? Well, let's describe them one at a time a little bit and see what options they offer. Now, Symphony number 2 is quite brief. It's 20 minutes long. It begins with this sort of sort of, string polyphony, night nocturnal, incredibly dissonant texture thing, which kind of symbolizes chaos. And throughout this short piece, chaos threatens to return, sometimes on the strings, sometimes on the winds. It essentially rises to two big climaxes, one is capped with a cymbal crash in each case, if you care. And then it simmers down for a second. Then there's a blast on a factory whistle in F sharp, and the chorus comes in. And the chorus is rather singable. It's much more tonal than the basically atonal rest of the symphony. And, they talk about how, they suffered and they marched and they're together and, we're looking toward Lenin, the commune, yay, because it ends with them screaming, not even singing. They just shout the ending. And then for one brief second, all of that chaos music comes back, and then it just ends with a thud, boom, and it's over. So that's number two. What can you ask for in a performance of number two? Well, I suppose you might want to have better choral singing, not that you'll ever want to hear what they're singing about, and a real factory whistle in F sharp, because Shostakovich actually provided an optional brass thing instead of the factory whistle, because you're never going to find a factory whistle in F sharp. Some performances, there have been a couple that actually make a point of insisting on the fact that they have a real factory whistle in F sharp. But quite frankly, if that's what you think makes a performance of the Second Symphony, then you deserve to discuss it separately. You know nothing about it's not a musical quality. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, it's an irrelevancy. It's a gimmick is what it is. And the factory whistle is not going to make or break a performance of the second. There really are no bad performances of the second. Everyone just does it. I mean, you might want to have a socialist, realist, more extreme version, which is as screechy and noisy and irritating as possible, in which case you might want to get Rushdestvensky's cycle if you could still find it. I mean, I haven't talked about much Rushdestvensky because it was on Melodia, re-released by licensed to RCA, and who knows where it is now. I mean, I've seen it, bits of it come and go, but why waste your time? So if you have a Shostakovich cycle on CD or you download one, you're going to get numbers 2 and 3, and they're going to be perfectly fine. And if you find yourself falling in love with number 2, go listen to more of them. I don't care which ones you listen to, because they're basically all the same. I mean, they really are. I know that fans of the work are going to deny that. They're going to say, oh, well, Haitink is one thing and Kondrashin. I mean, how can you compare the two? Well, because the music is not really susceptible of interpretive freedom. They just sound like what the different orchestras sound like. But they don't sound like expressively there's anything going on there. And so there's nothing to talk about interpretively. Now, the Third Symphony is quite different from the second. First of all, the Third Symphony is relatively tonal. It's much easier to listen to. It's about almost 10 minutes longer. It's closer to half an hour long, 25 minutes to half an hour or thereabouts. It too ends with an even more atrocious revolutionary chorus, if you think that that's possible, although it's kind of vulgar and brassy and parade ground march music. But the thing about the third that makes it even more controversial than the second is that Shostakovich's intentions in writing the third was to write a piece that had absolutely no literal repetition whatsoever. The result of that is that you have no idea where you are in it or why it does what it does. It has one section after another, mostly based on sort of simple march tunes or fragments played by brass instruments, and it just goes until suddenly this chorus comes in and ends in a glorious triumph of communism led forward by the trumpets, and then it stops. Now, is it terrible music? No, nothing Shostakovich wrote was terrible music. He was too gifted a composer. I mean, it has very interesting episodes. It really does. There's a whole sort of scary, weird trombone-like recitative thing before the chorus comes in that might remind you of a certain other work, which shall remain nameless. that also has a chorus. In fact, the entire Third Symphony is kind of like a socialist realist gloss on the finale of said symphony with the chorus in it. It's similar in that respect. It has a sequence of episodes, and then the chorus comes in. But those episodes don't particularly, in this case, relate to one another. And it's fun to listen to, frankly, moment by moment. I mean, it is. It may drive you crazy because it has no form, but the music itself it doesn't go down that with much difficulty. It's okay. And everyone does it, and they all like the second. They all sort of come out sounding more or less the same, because expressively, there's almost nothing there. The music is Shostakovich is known for his expression of anguish, expression of sardonicism, expression of giddy high spirits and incredible depression and darkness. And these two symphonies have absolutely none of that. They are abstractions. They are like Cubist art, Cubist music, Cubist abstractions. I don't mean Cubist art with like people in it. I mean Cubist art with like cubes. I mean real cubes, lots of cubes, ice cubes, cube smart, mini storage cubes. That's the type of stuff it is. And if there isn't going to be an enormous range of possible expression, then there's very little you can do with the music except play it a little faster, a little slower, a little louder, a little softer, and sort of alter the sharpness with which we perceive the musical cubes. And some of you, again, may totally disagree with that evaluation, but that's my feeling. That's how I feel about the works. I couldn't care less who does them. That doesn't mean I don't enjoy hearing them once in a while within the context of a Shostakovich cycle. But I have yet to develop a preference for any one over any other. And so within limits, very, very strict limits, I leave it to you to, argue over which performances of these symphonies you like the best. But let me tell you something, and I really mean this in all seriousness. I've heard all of them. I've heard every performance of these symphonies that has yet been released in every possible Shostakovich cycle or separate version of them. And if you haven't done similar, if you haven't spent just as much time going through all of them to decide which ones are the most meaningful, don't even bother commenting, because I'm not interested in which one you like best as a recommendation for other people. I don't think that that's valid. I'm telling all of you out there, no single person's preference for these pieces is valuable as advice to you as to which one you should listen to. These are works you need to simply absorb on your own, however you find them. And if it turns out that one of them really, really speaks to you, that you're incredibly curious, then sure, go listen to other versions, stream them, get 100 different performances or all the ones that you can, and decide which one you like best on that basis. It's just like any other piece of music in that respect. But I know very, very few people, critics or normal listeners or anyone who really know Shostakovich, who have any strong preferences about either of these works. They just don't. It's not the kind of music that is susceptible to that kind of passion and feeling. And that's my opinion. So I'm sorry if this disappoints some of you who wanted me to go through the process and talk about the minutiae of different performances. Neither symphony deserves it. I don't think it makes any sense to do it. And so I ain't gonna do it. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.